2b2t has a reputation as one of the most dangerous, toxic Minecraft servers on the planet. That is, if you can even log in. Because of the sheer amount of players trying to get in at any given time, you'll likely find yourself waiting in the queue. Usually hundreds of players long, it can take hours to log in just once. Well, what if I told you that just by standing in that line, your base coordinates can be leaked? An exploit has been happening under everyone's noses that has gotten bases on the server leaked and destroyed. Recently, a griefing group on the server has taken advantage of this exploit and has been causing havoc. I've discovered how the exploit works, and let me tell you, how someone managed to discover this is mind-boggling. It is such an unorthodox method of obtaining coordinates that only a Minecraft player base as dedicated as 2b2t's could have discovered it. Today I'll be telling you how the exploit works, the destruction the exploit caused, and how you can protect yourself. Spoiler alert, you can't. Now then, let's do this. Over the past month, a new griefing group on the oldest anarchy server in Minecraft has surfaced, simply called the Yakuza. No, not the actual Japanese mafia, a group of players with the sole purpose of blowing things up. They use a black banner with a blue symbol in the center. Their banners have been showing up everywhere and can even be seen in some of my previous videos. Now, there have been plenty of groups like this throughout 2b's history, but the ones that make history are usually the ones that use exploits to find bases. Well, Sairi, the founder of Yakuza, let me in on a little secret. They've been using the Q server to find player coordinates and locations. At first, I thought he was joking. If this was possible, it would have been done years ago. But then, he showed me exactly how it worked, and the history behind it. To understand how the exploit works, let me explain how 2b2t's Q operates on a technical level. The Q server is separate from the main server. Players that are in the queue are put into spectator mode, but with restrictions. You are forced to look directly ahead at the void and are unable to spectate other players waiting alongside you. Even using free cam, you can see that your character is forced to look directly ahead at all times. Strangely enough, if you move too far away with free cam, it snaps you back to the starting position. The spectate menu can be accessed, but it cannot be utilized. Under normal circumstances, it is not possible to bypass any of these restrictions. This is how the Q server has worked for several years now. But here is where things get wild. Sairi discovered that using a proxy server, it's possible to send data packets to the Q server that allow the user to bypass the restrictions and spectate others in the queue. Sairi managed to accomplish this feat using a proxy server called 2b2t's. Now, previously, this proxy was used to automatically connect players into the queue so that they didn't have to wait. Essentially, a queue skip. After the server admin, Housemaster, found out about it, he changed the queue server to make it almost impossible to skip the queue using this method. It makes sense. Players essentially had priority without actually paying to support the server, so I don't blame House for shutting it down. But even though the queue skip was shut down, Sairi continued to mess around with the proxy to try and bypass the fix that House had put in. He wasn't able to skip the queue, but he accidentally discovered something even more powerful. He was able to see a list of players that were waiting in the queue. There used to be a command called /glist that would show you the players waiting in queue, but it was removed by House a while ago. Probably because he didn't want players using this information maliciously. Well, that's exactly what Sairi was about to do. From here, he picked a random name from the list and then put it into name MC. This allowed him to find the UUID. In the Java edition, every Minecraft account has a number called a UUID, or Universally Unique Identifier, that is bound to an account forever. Even if you change your name, the UUID will remain. But by putting in this number that he had acquired, it allowed him to bypass the spectator mode restrictions and directly observe that player waiting in queue. Now, the player was just doing the same thing as everyone else, looking forward. Sairi, of course, was not going to stop here. He wanted to see how far he could push this. He discovered that intentionally crashing your game client would generate a crash report that gave the coordinates of the player you were spectating. Not their coordinates on the Q server, their coordinates on 2b2t, a major vulnerability in the Q system that was never addressed because it was previously thought to be impossible to spectate others. Sairi had just accidentally discovered one of the most powerful coordinate exploits in the server's history, and he was the only one who knew about it. So, by spectating another player in queue and then intentionally crashing your game, it would leak their coordinates. With this knowledge of the exploit, Sairi began stockpiling coordinates, as many as he could. He would look through the queue names and try to find people of significance, and write their coordinates down once he crashed. Once he had a sizable amount of coordinates, the Yakuza began showing up at people's bases. These bases weren't just noob bases. They weren't just nomad huts. They were fully fledged group bases and even large solo bases. Sairi and the Yakuza made quick work of every single base they came across. Not revealing their methods, base owners were left shocked and confused as to how they had been found out, which caused the members of group bases to point fingers and accuse each other of being insiders or leaking the coordinates. It became madness. The exploit is such a non-traditional method, completely unorthodox, so it makes sense that players wouldn't believe a coordinate exploit had been used. Regardless, the Yakuza have done just as much destruction socially in the 2b2t community as they have physically on the server. So now, what is the fallout from the exploit? How much damage has been done? Were you affected? Well, as previously mentioned, established bases have been going down every few days. So far, 7 major solo and group bases have been compromised, and that's only the public number. I'm aware that there have been some other griefs that the Yakuza have not claimed responsibility for, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were behind it. So how many 2b2t players were affected by this exploit? Well, hypothetically, a lot. If you waited in normal queue anytime from October 15th to November 13th, you possibly had your location leaked. And if you were in priority queue and had to wait for a few minutes because it was peak hours, you have also possibly had your location leaked. As I've mentioned, Sairi and the Yakuza have been tight-lipped on how many sets of coordinates they are sitting on right now, but I expect more destruction to happen soon. And with the Yakuza group growing in numbers by the day, we might have the largest dedicated griefing group that we've had in quite some time. So, how can you protect yourself from this coordinate exploit? Well, if you wait in the normal queue, you can't. I'm sorry. If you have priority queue and don't play during peak hours, you should be fine. But luckily for everyone, just a few days ago, Housemaster patched the queue vulnerability that gave 2b2t coordinates to the queue server, making Sairi's current method useless. However, the fact that this vulnerability existed in the first place leads me to believe there are probably others as well. And don't forget that there's a big stockpile of coordinates that haven't been visited yet, so your base could still be in danger. I've got to say, Yakuza is a pretty appropriate name for a group that essentially beat the queue server to death just so it would give away coordinates. Sairi continues to look for ways to exploit 2b2t using his proxy. Chaos like this is pretty much the norm these days. Just how many bases are going to fall at the hands of the Yakuza? Make sure to like the video and subscribe for more 2b2t content. Also make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram to stay updated on when new 2b2t content is coming out. Thank you so much for watching today. Take it easy, Fit Fam, and if you plan to play on 2b2t, just make sure to stay alive out there. Also, be careful in the queue.